There's a space for you in my bed, human. I was shocked by the alien queen's offer. Oliver Chen had exactly 47 seconds to stop his stomach from staging a full rebellion before the docking clamps engaged with a shudder that rattled his teeth. The sovereign ascendant didn't just loom in the viewport, it breathed, its hull rippling with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat visible from space. Somewhere in his orientation materials, buried between cultural sensitivity guidelines and what to do if you're accidentally married, there'd been a mention that the flagship was partially organic. Nobody had mentioned it would look like a whale that had mated with a cathedral and decided to take up residence in the stars. The docking tube extended with the wet sound of something alive, and Oliver tried very hard not to think about being swallowed. His tablet chimed, another message from Director Hassan, probably reminding him for the 17th time not to cause an interstellar incident. Too late for that advice, considering Earth had already caused several incidents, which was precisely why Oliver was here instead of someone competent. He was expendable. The thought sat in his chest like cold metal. The airlock cycled with a hiss that sounded almost disappointed, and Oliver stepped into air that tasted of copper and something floral he couldn't name. The corridor beyond was nothing like the sterile white passages of human stations. These walls moved, breathing gently, their surfaces adorned with veins of light that shifted from amber to deep violet as he walked. The floor was warm through his standard-issue boots, almost body temperature, and Oliver had the distinct impression he was walking through something's intestinal tract. He added that to the growing list of things he wished he could unthink. His tablet displayed the route to Conference Hall Theta 7 in cheerful blue arrows, as if this were a corporate campus rather than an alien warship that could crack Earth like an egg. Oliver had memorized his opening remarks. 3 minutes on agricultural partnerships, emphasis on sustainable practices, careful pivot to technology exchange. He'd practiced in the mirror until the words lost all meaning, until he could deliver them while thinking about literally anything else, like whether the synthetic coffee he'd chugged before departure had been a mistake. His stomach suggested yes, emphatically. The corridor curved ahead, and Oliver rounded it to find his path blocked by 4 figures in crimson uniforms that seemed to grow directly from their skin. Guards, unmistakably, though they carried no visible weapons. They didn't need them. Each stood a head taller than Oliver, their skin the deep red of old blood, and their ears, long, elegantly pointed, adorned with silver bands, tracked his movement with predatory precision. One of them stepped forward, and Oliver's tablet made a small defeated sound as all its helpful blue arrows vanished. "Oliver Chen," the guard said, and it wasn't a question. Her voice had harmonics human vocal cords couldn't produce, like she was speaking in chords. "Come with us." Oliver's diplomatic training kicked in, which was unfortunate because his diplomatic training was approximately 6 weeks old and mostly theoretical. "I'm expected in Conference Hall." "Not anymore." The guard's expression didn't change, but something in the air did, a subtle pressure that made Oliver's hindbrain scream warnings. His forebrain tried desperately to intellectualize. "Queen Emma requests your presence immediately." The other 3 guards had arranged themselves in a formation that looked casual, but absolutely wasn't. Oliver did the mental math. 4 alien guards who could probably tie him into decorative knots versus his passionate commitment to not dying alone in space. The math wasn't complicated. "Lead the way," he said, and tried to make it sound like a choice. They moved through corridors that grew progressively more ornate, the pulsing walls giving way to surfaces that looked like solidified starlight. Other crew members passed them, some crimson skinned like the guards, others in shades of amber and deep purple, all with those distinctive long ears that marked them as citizens of the sovereign empire. A few glanced at Oliver with what might have been curiosity, or might have been the expression you'd give a sandwich you weren't sure was still good. He smiled anyway, because his mother had raised him to be polite, even when potentially being marched to his execution. The guards stopped before doors that seemed grown rather than built, their surface covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly, geometries that suggested dimensions Oliver's brain refused to process. One guard placed her palm against the surface, and the doors sighed open like a living thing exhaling. "Inside," she said, and the other three had already stepped back, their formation breaking. Just like that, Oliver was alone. The room beyond glowed with soft bioluminescence, and Oliver's last thought before crossing the threshold was that his opening remarks about soybeans suddenly seemed catastrophically inadequate. The first thing Oliver noticed was the silence. Not absence of sound, but a quality of quiet that felt intentional, like the room itself was holding its breath. The second thing was the woman who absolutely had to be Queen Emma, draped across a chair that looked like it had been convinced rather than constructed to hold that particular shape. She didn't look up when he entered, her attention fixed on a holographic display that floated above her palm, showing what appeared to be shipping routes or possibly someone's very complicated family tree. Her skin was the color of dark wine in candlelight, and those ears, God, those ears, rose from her dark hair like elegant accusations, each adorned with thin golden bands that caught the bioluminescent glow. She was taller than he'd expected, her frame suggesting she could probably bench press him without much effort, and she wore robes that seemed to shift color as she breathed, moving through shades of deep blue and violet. Oliver cleared his throat, which in the perfect silence sounded like he was gargling gravel. Emma's eyes flicked up, golden, with vertical pupils that made his hindbrain scream, "Predator," while his forebrain tried desperately to remember the formal greeting protocol. He opened his mouth to deliver his carefully prepared introduction. "I've read your proposals," Emma said, her voice carrying an accent that linguists had spent 3 months failing to categorize. She dismissed the hologram with a gesture, those golden bands chiming softly. Soybeans and water purification systems. How terribly romantic. Oliver's prepared speech died somewhere between his brain and his mouth. We thought agricultural partnership would be a good starting point for convincing me not to let Admiral Cross turn your planet into a mining operation." Emma stood in one fluid motion, and Oliver revised his bench press estimate upward. She was taller than him by at least 4 inches, and the way she moved suggested either extensive martial training or she was possibly made of liquid. "Sweet of you. Misguided, but sweet." She began to circle him, and Oliver fought the urge to turn with her like they were in some kind of predator-prey dance, which he supposed they absolutely were. "Your Majesty, if I could explain the strategic benefits—" "You're nervous." Emma completed her circuit, stopping directly in front of him. Up close, he could see that her skin had an almost pearlescent quality, and she smelled like something between night-blooming jasmine in the air before a thunderstorm. "Your heart rate increased by 40% when I stood up. Are you afraid of tall women, Oliver, or just queens who control your planet's fate?" The use of his first name short-circuited something in Oliver's diplomatic conditioning. "Both, currently. It's a package deal." Emma's laugh was nothing like the refined diplomatic chuckle he'd expected. It was genuine, slightly too loud, and made her ears do something complicated with those golden bands that produced a sound like wind chimes having opinions. "Finally, honesty. Do you know how rare that is? Everyone who stands where you're standing either stammers platitudes or tries to seduce me. Usually both, which is just exhausting." "I'm definitely doing the stammering part," Oliver said, then wished he could somehow unleaven the last 3 seconds. His mouth was apparently staging a coup against his brain's better judgment. "Yes, but you're doing it authentically, which is refreshing." Emma moved to the windows, vast panels that showed space in ways human ships couldn't capture, stars that seemed close enough to touch, nebulae that looked like abstract paintings of gods having feelings. "Tell me something, Oliver. Do you actually believe those soybean proposals will save your species? Or did your superiors send you here because you're disposable?" The question hit like a physical thing. Oliver found himself answering before he could calculate the diplomatic cost. "Column B, mostly. I'm technically the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Agricultural Trade Relations, which is a title that means we needed someone who wouldn't be missed if this went catastrophically wrong." Emma turned from the window, her expression unreadable in the shifting light. "And how do you feel about that?" "Honestly, oscillating between existential dread and the worst case of imposter syndrome in human history." Oliver's filter had apparently taken a vacation to somewhere his brain couldn't reach it. "Also, I really need to know, Is this room getting warmer, or is that just terror affecting my temperature regulation? The ship adjusts ambient temperature based on occupant stress levels, Emma said, and something in her voice had softened slightly. You're broadcasting anxiety like a pulsar broadcasts radiation. It's very loud. She gestured to a low table where two vessels sat, filled with liquid that glowed faintly purple and looked like it might be sentient. Sit, drink. If we're going to have a conversation, you might as well stop vibrating. Oliver looked at the seating arrangement. Furniture that seemed to grow from the floor itself, organic and slightly unsettling, and then at Emma, who was watching him with those unnerving golden eyes. Is this the part where you poison me? Or are we still in the psychological warfare portion of the evening? If I wanted you dead, you'd have died in the docking tube. Emma settled onto one of the seats with boneless grace. The beverage is called shimmer wine. It won't intoxicate you. I checked your biochemistry beforehand. We're similar enough that it'll just relax you, which frankly, you need desperately. You checked my biochemistry? Oliver lowered himself onto the opposite seat, which immediately began adjusting to his form in ways that felt disturbingly intimate. Of course, I'm not a monster. Emma picked up one of the vessels. Well, I am, technically, but I'm a considerate monster. Try it. Oliver lifted the vessel, warm with a texture like glass mixed with something alive, and took a cautious sip. The shimmer wine tasted like starlight might taste if starlight had flavor profiles, sweet and sharp and slightly effervescent, with an aftertaste that reminded him of summer nights he'd never actually experienced. Good? Emma asked. Disturbingly good, Oliver admitted. I feel like I should be taking notes for Earth's beverage industry, except we probably just weaponize it somehow. Emma's smile was small but genuine. See? Honesty. We're making progress. The shimmer wine was doing something to Oliver's nervous system that felt illegal in at least 3 jurisdictions. Not intoxication exactly, but a loosening of the vice grip his anxiety had maintained since he'd boarded the transport to this floating nightmare. He took another sip and watched Emma over the rim of his vessel, trying to reconcile the woman casually drinking alien wine with the monarch, who could presumably order Earth's annihilation between breakfast and lunch. You're staring, Emma said, not looking at him. She was tracing patterns on the table's surface with one finger, and the bioluminescence followed her touch like eager puppies. You're terrifying, Oliver replied, then added, in a respectful, diplomatic way. There's no diplomatic way to call someone terrifying. It's binary. Either I frighten you or I don't. Emma finally looked at him, those golden eyes catching the light in ways that made his vertebrae remember they were supposed to keep him upright. Which is it? Oliver set down his vessel before his hands could betray how much it wanted to shake. You absolutely terrify me. You're the most powerful person I've ever been in a room with. You could have me spaced for looking at you wrong, and I'm pretty sure those ear bands aren't just decorative. They're not. Emma touched one of the golden bands, and it chimed a note that Oliver felt in his chest cavity. They're neural interfaces, direct connection to the ship's systems. I can feel the Ascendant's hull integrity, weapons status, even the temperature of the hydroponics bay from here. She tilted her head, making the band sing a small chord. Right now, I can feel your ship's pathetic excuse for life support struggling 3 docking levels down. It's like listening to an asthmatic wheeze. Our ships are vintage, Oliver said defensively. We prefer to think of them as charmingly antiquated rather than death traps. Your ships are held together with what my chief engineer called optimism and spite. Emma's smile was sharp. She was being generous. She leaned back, and the chair obligingly shifted to support her in what looked like calculated casualness. Here's my situation, Oliver, since we're being honest. I have a council of military advisors who see your planet as a resource stockpile with delusions of sovereignty. I have trade ministers who've calculated the profit margins on turning humanity into cheap labor. And I have cultural attachés who genuinely believe you're all adorable primitives who need our benevolent guidance. Oliver felt something cold settle in his stomach that the shimmer wine couldn't touch. And which camp are you in? None of them, which is the problem. Emma's fingers drummed against the table, and the bioluminescence pulsed in rhythm. They all bore me spectacularly. The military option is wasteful. Dead workers don't mine ore. The slavery model is morally bankrupt and terrible for PR across the other 14 systems. And the patronizing savior approach makes me want to space myself out of sheer secondhand embarrassment. So what do you want? Oliver asked and tried not to think about how much hung on her answer. Emma was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant, focused on something Oliver couldn't see. The room's light had shifted to deeper hues, indigo and violet, colors that made the space feel smaller, like the universe was slowly contracting around them. I want to see if your species is as adaptable as your propaganda claims. If given the opportunity for actual partnership instead of subjugation, would you take it? Or would pride make you refuse help from someone who could crush you? That's a hell of a hypothetical, Oliver said. His pulse was doing something complicated, and he was reasonably certain Emma could hear it. It's not hypothetical, it's a test. Emma stood, moving toward him with that liquid grace that suggested her bones were optional. Every species that joins the sovereign empire faces it eventually. Can you accept partnership with someone more powerful, or does your ego demand equality that doesn't exist? She stopped close enough that Oliver could see the subtle variations in her skin tone, the way the crimson deepened around her collarbones. Most species fail. They'd rather die proud than live subordinate. Oliver's throat was very dry despite the shimmer wine. And if we pass, then Earth gets technology that will solve your energy crisis, medical advances that will double your lifespan, and agricultural methods that will end hunger permanently. Emma's voice was quiet, almost gentle. But you'll have to accept that it came from me, from someone you can never match in power, from a species that will always be ahead of you. That's, Oliver started, then stopped. His training screamed warnings about negotiating from weakness, about maintaining dignity, about the importance of appearing equal. But his training had been designed by people who'd never met Emma, who'd never seen her earbands chime with ship diagnostics, who'd never felt the weight of golden eyes that could probably see through him at a molecular level. That's insulting, Emma offered. Patronizing? Offensive to human dignity? Smart, Oliver finished. Frustrating and kind of humiliating, but smart. You're offering everything we need in exchange for swallowing our pride and admitting we're outmatched. Emma's expression shifted into something Oliver couldn't read. You understand? I spent 3 years as a junior trade attaché to the Centauri colonies, Oliver said. I'm exhaustingly familiar with being underestimated, talked over, and treated like furniture that occasionally has opinions. I know what it's like to smile and nod while someone more powerful decides your fate. He met her eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The difference is, you're at least being honest about it. Something changed in the air between them, a shift Oliver felt more than saw. Emma's posture softened fractionally, her shoulders losing some indefinable tension, and one of her ear bands chimed a note that sounded almost curious. She moved back to her seat, but this time when she settled, it felt less like a queen holding court and more like a person collapsing after a long day. Honesty is exhausting, Emma said, refilling her vessel from a container that seemed to materialize from the table itself. The shimmer wine poured upward briefly before remembering gravity was supposed to be a thing. Do you know how many diplomatic meetings I've sat through where everyone performed their lines perfectly? Where ambassadors smile and nod and say absolutely nothing of substance for hours? She took a long drink. It's like watching theater where everyone forgot there's supposed to be a plot. Oliver laughed despite himself. I sat through a 6-hour trade discussion about grain tariffs once, where I'm pretty sure everyone involved died of boredom, but our bodies kept going through the motions. 6 hours? Amateur. Emma's smile was conspiratorial. I once mediated a territorial dispute that lasted 4 days. By the end, I was seriously considering starting a war just to make something happen. She gestured with her vessel, and some of the shimmer wine sloshed over the rim, defying physics by flowing back up into the container. The ship caught it, she explained, seeing his expression. It's helpful like that. Also judgmental. The floor just sent me a notification that I'm experiencing coordination difficulties and should consider hydration. Your ship is passive-aggressive? All ships are passive-aggressive if you integrate them properly. Emma tapped one of her earbands. The Ascendant thinks I work too much. It keeps adjusting my chair to optimal sleeping positions during council meetings. Very subtle. Very annoying. Oliver tried to imagine his government-issue transport having opinions about his life choices and failed. Our ships barely communicate their engine status without 3 layers of interface translation. The idea of one that cares about my sleep schedule is science fiction. Your ships are science fiction, Emma countered. Terrifying science fiction where the call is coming from inside the house and the house is held together with duct tape. She paused. Do you still use duct tape? The cultural briefing suggested you did, but I assumed they were exaggerating. We absolutely still use duct tape. It's holding together approximately 40% of Earth's infrastructure. Oliver accepted more shimmer wine when Emma offered, noting that his hands had stopped shaking sometime in the last 5 minutes. There's a running joke that humanity's greatest invention wasn't the wheel or fire. It was adhesive strips and the optimism to believe they'd fix anything. Emma's laugh was unguarded, bright, and made her ears do something complicated that produced a sound like joy rendered as music. I need to meet your engineers. Anyone who can keep ships flying with tape and spite deserves respect, if not an intervention. They'd probably try to fix your ship, Oliver warned. The Ascendant would wake up one day with racing stripes and a sound system. The Ascendant would have opinions about that. Emma's expression turned thoughtful, her fingers absently playing with one of the golden bands. You know what nobody tells you about being queen? How lonely it gets. Everyone either wants something from me or is too terrified to speak honestly. I'm surrounded by people and completely isolated. She caught herself, and something like embarrassment crossed her features. Sorry, the shimmer wine makes me maudlin. Ignore that. No, I get it, Oliver said, surprising himself with his own honesty. Different scale, obviously, but I know what it's like being alone in a crowd. Being the person nobody actually sees because they're too busy seeing your position. He rotated his vessel between his palms. It's why I volunteered for this mission, actually. Being expendable at least means nobody's pretending I matter. Emma's golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his spine straighten involuntarily. You matter. You don't know me well enough to make that assessment. I know you're the first human who's spoken to me like I'm a person instead of a threat or a prize. Emma leaned forward, elbows on the table, close enough that Oliver could count the subtle variations in her skin tone. I know you're smart enough to be terrified, but brave enough to be honest. I know you make self-deprecating jokes when you're nervous, and that you actually care about those pathetic soybean proposals, even though you know they're inadequate. She tilted her head. And I know you haven't had a genuine relationship in approximately 2 standard years, which your stress pheromones are advertising like a neon sign. Oliver's face did something between a blush and a system crash. You can smell my... That's horrifying. That's a violation of privacy on levels I didn't know existed. 3 years, actually, Emma continued, utterly shameless. I was being polite with the 2-year estimate. Your biochemistry is very chatty. I'm going to need you to stop knowing things about my personal life that I've successfully repressed. Oliver buried his face in his hands. This is worse than the time my mother set up a dating profile for me and listed adequate conversationalist as my primary selling point. Your mother sounds efficient. Emma's smile was wicked. Also, adequate conversationalist is underselling it. You're actually quite engaging when you forget to be terrified. Oliver looked up. Is this what is happening right now? Emma stood, and the movement was deliberate enough that Oliver's entire nervous system went on high alert. She crossed the small distance between them, and suddenly she was close enough that he could see the way the bioluminescent light caught in her dark hair, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin like she was a sun condensed into human-adjacent form. Her ears, those impossible, elegant ears, were angled forward in a way that his brain interpreted as focused attention, and every one of those golden bands was perfectly still, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. What's happening? Emma said, her voice lower now, intimate in a way that made Oliver's pulse spike. Is that I'm about to make you an offer, and you're going to think it's political maneuvering or some kind of power play, because that's what you've been trained to expect. She paused and one corner of her mouth lifted. But it's not. It's just honest want from someone who's tired of pretending. Oliver's throat was the Sahara Desert. His vocal cords had apparently filed for early retirement. He managed something between a squeak and actual speech. An offer. There's a space for you in my bed, human. Emma said it simply, directly, the way someone might offer tea or comment on the weather. The casualness of it made the words hit harder, like an asteroid wrapped in silk. Not as conquest or curiosity or some elaborate diplomatic gambit, as a statement that maybe our species aren't so different that we can't find common ground in the most fundamental of ways. Oliver's brain was attempting several processes simultaneously and succeeding at none of them. He stopped, recalibrated, tried again. Your Majesty, I don't think... Emma, she corrected. If you're going to panic, at least use my name. Emma, Oliver repeated, and it felt strange on his tongue. Too intimate. Too real. I'm fairly certain there are regulations about this. Multiple regulations. Possibly entire regulatory frameworks. Earth regulations or mine? Emma's smile was playful now, and it transformed her face from imposing to something dangerously appealing. Because mine say I can do whatever I want, which is one of the few perks of absolute monarchy. Her expression softened slightly. I'm not ordering you, Oliver. I'm asking. There's a difference. A difference that's really hard to see when you're the person who controls whether my planet becomes a parking lot, Oliver said. But his voice lacked conviction. His body was betraying him spectacularly. Leaning toward her without conscious permission, his pupils probably dilated enough to be visible from orbit. Emma reached out slowly, giving him plenty of time to retreat, and touched his jaw with fingers that were warm and real and sent electricity down his spine. Your heart rate just increased by 60%. Your skin temperature is up. You're releasing pheromones that suggest interest despite your verbal objections. She tilted her head. Your body is having a very different conversation than your mouth. My body doesn't have to file incident reports, Oliver managed. My body doesn't understand interstellar politics or power dynamics or... He lost his train of thought when Emma's thumb brushed his cheekbone. Or basic self-preservation, apparently. I like your body's honesty better. Emma's golden eyes were close enough now that Oliver could see they weren't uniformly colored. There were flecks of amber near the pupils, darker rings at the edges. Here's the truth with no politics attached. I find you attractive. Your mind, your humor, the way you're terrified but standing your ground anyway. The fact that you make me laugh, which approximately 3 people in 14 star systems can claim. Her voice dropped lower. And yes, the 3-year celibacy thing is also appealing because it means we're both disasters in the same specific way. Oliver laughed, slightly hysterical. This is insane. This is the most insane thing that's ever happened to me, and I once had to negotiate with a Centauri trade minister who communicated exclusively through interpretive dance. Was the dancing good? Emma asked, completely serious. It was baffling. I still don't know if we agreed to anything. Oliver was acutely aware that he hadn't moved away from her touch, that his hand had somehow found its way to her waist, where the fabric of her robes felt like liquid starlight. Emma, I need you to understand. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know the protocol for this. I don't even know if we're biologically compatible for... We are, Emma said, and her smile turned wicked. I told you I checked your biochemistry very thoroughly. We're compatible in all the relevant ways, though you might find some surprises. Good surprises, she added at his expression. Allegedly, the xenobiology reports were very enthusiastic about certain anatomical features. Oliver's face was approximately the temperature of a small star. I'm going to die. I'm going to die of embarrassment on an alien flagship, and my obituary is going to be the worst thing ever written. You're not going to die. Emma's other hand came up to frame his face, her touch gentle despite her obvious strength. You're going to stop overthinking. You're going to trust that I know what I want and that I'm choosing this freely, and then you're going to decide what you want, separate from duty or fear or what Earth expects. What Oliver wanted, he realized with startling clarity, was to stop being afraid. Not of Emma, though she was terrifying in about 17 different ways, but of choosing something for himself instead of letting duty or expectation make his decisions. He'd spent 3 years being adequate, being expendable, being the person who got sent because nobody would miss him. And here was someone who saw him, actually saw him, and wanted him anyway. "I want," Oliver said carefully, his hands still at Emma's waist like they'd forgotten how to be anywhere else, "to stop feeling like I'm about to be court-martialed for having feelings." "Feelings are allowed," Emma said, "even encouraged, especially the complicated ones." "I'm terrible at casual," Oliver warned. "I get attached. I overthink everything. I once sent a follow-up message to a date 3 months after they ghosted me because I thought maybe they'd just been busy." Emma's laugh was bright and unrestrained. "Good, so am I. I'm a queen. I don't do anything casually. I once started a trade war because someone implied my military strategy was derivative." Her thumbs traced patterns on his jaw that made coherent thought challenging. "I'm not proposing casual, Oliver. I'm proposing honest. A night where neither of us has to perform our roles. Where you're not Earth's desperate diplomat and I'm not the terrifying monarch. Where we're just two people who are tired of being alone in the vastness of space." Oliver looked at her. Really looked. Past the golden eyes and the crimson skin and the ears that marked her as definitively not human. He saw the same exhaustion he felt, the same loneliness, the same desperate hope that maybe connection was possible even across the impossible gulf between their worlds. His diplomatic training was screaming. His sense of self-preservation was filing formal complaints. But something deeper, something that had been quiet for 3 years, was finally speaking up. "Okay," he said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff in the best possible way. Emma's smile was incandescent. "Okay?" "Okay," Oliver repeated more firmly. "Yes, I want this. I want you. Even though it's terrifying and probably violates several protocols and my delegation is going to have collective heart failure when they find out I disappeared into the Queen's private quarters and—" He stopped himself. "I'm spiraling. I do that when I'm nervous." "I noticed." Emma's hands slid from his face to his shoulders, steadying. "Breathe. We have time. No rush." Oliver breathed and the air tasted like ozone and jasmine and possibility. "For the record, if this goes badly, I'm blaming you in my incident report." "If this goes badly, I'll help you write it." Emma leaned in, and Oliver met her halfway, and when their lips touched, it was like completing a circuit he hadn't known was open. She tasted like shimmer wine in starlight, and her skin was warm against his hands, and those ear bands chimed softly, a sound like approval or joy, or maybe just the ship being smug about its predictions. The kiss deepened, and Oliver stopped cataloging sensations and just experienced them. Emma's hands in his hair, the solid warmth of her body against his, the way she made a small sound of satisfaction that he felt more than heard. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Oliver's brain had temporarily abandoned language in favor of just static. "Still terrified?" Emma asked, her forehead resting against his. "Absolutely," Oliver said, "but in a different way. More excited terrified than about to die terrified." "I'll take it." Emma stepped back slightly, her hand finding his. "Come on, the bedroom is through here, and unlike this room, it has furniture designed for activities more interesting than drinking." Oliver let himself be led, his pulse hammering but his feet moving forward. The bedroom was dimmer, lit by bioluminescence that pulsed in slow rhythms like a heartbeat, and the bed looked less like furniture and more like the ship had decided to be especially helpful. Emma turned to face him, her expression open in a way he suspected few people ever saw. "Last chance to run," she said. "I won't hold it against you." "Well, I'll be disappointed, but I won't hold it against you." Oliver thought about his delegation waiting in Conference Hall Theta 7, probably panicking. He thought about Earth hanging in the balance, about treaties and politics and the weight of representing an entire species. Then he thought about Emma's laugh, about golden eyes that saw him as more than expendable, about the way loneliness felt lighter when shared. "I'm not running," he said and pulled her close. "I'm choosing. For once in my life, I'm choosing what I actually want instead of what I'm supposed to want." Emma's kiss was answer enough, and when they tumbled onto the bed together, which obligingly adjusted to support them both, Oliver let himself believe that maybe connection was possible after all, that maybe humanity's first real alliance with another species wouldn't be built on treaties or trade agreements, but on two lonely people finding each other in the vast dark between stars and deciding that was worth more than protocol. The ship's bioluminescence pulsed in what Oliver would swear was approval, and somewhere far below, his delegation probably assumed he was dead. He'd deal with that in the morning. Right now he had a queen's attention, her warmth, her genuine smile, and the intoxicating realization that being seen was better than being safe. Hours later, tangled together in sheets that felt like silk woven from moonlight, Emma's fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest, while his hand played with one of her ears, which were apparently sensitive in ways the cultural briefings hadn't mentioned, Oliver finally asked the question that had been nagging at him. "What happens tomorrow?" Emma was quiet for a moment, her breathing steady against his shoulder. "Tomorrow I announce a formal alliance with Earth. Technology sharing, medical advances, the whole package. My council will protest. I'll overrule them. Your planet gets everything it needs to survive and thrive." Oliver propped himself up on one elbow. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Emma's smile was soft in the dim light. "I'd already decided before you arrived. The proposals were irrelevant. I was always going to choose partnership over exploitation. But I needed to know if humanity could accept help without letting pride destroy the opportunity." She touched his face. "You proved it could. You chose connection over dignity, honest want over political calculation. That's rare. So this," Oliver gestured between them. "This was a test." "No," Emma said firmly. "This was me being selfish. This was me wanting something for myself instead of for the Empire. This was real, Oliver, separate from politics. The alliance happens regardless of what happened between us." Relief and something warmer flooded through him. "Good. Because I really didn't want to explain to Director Hassan that I saved humanity through strategic seduction." Emma laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Though you'd be a legend." "I'd be a cautionary tale." Oliver settled back down, Emma curling against him like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "What happens to us?" "Whatever we want," Emma said simply. "You can stay if you want. Join my delegation as a permanent liaison, or return to Earth and we figure out the long-distance thing. Though the distances are very long, and FTL communication has a 6-hour delay." She paused. "Or this can be what it was. One perfect night between two people who needed it. No obligations." Oliver considered. Earth needed him about as much as it needed another bureaucrat, which was to say, not at all. But Emma had offered him something he hadn't known he was missing. Purpose that mattered. Connection that felt real. A place where being himself was enough. "I think," he said slowly, "I'd like to stay, if you'll have me, in whatever capacity doesn't cause an interstellar incident." Emma's smile was brilliant enough to light the room. "I think we can arrange that. Cultural liaison, maybe. Humanity's representative to the Sovereign Court." Her earbands chimed softly. "The ship approves. It's been nagging me about my isolation for months." "Your ship is a matchmaker?" "My ship is obnoxiously invested in my personal happiness." Emma kissed him, soft and sweet. But for once, it was right. Outside the windows, stars wheeled in patterns humans were only beginning to map. And somewhere in the vast dark, Earth spun on, saved not by soybeans or water purification systems, but by one expendable diplomat who chose an honesty over fear. Oliver closed his eyes, Emma's warmth solid against him, and thought that maybe being adequate had its uses after all. It meant nobody expected greatness, which left room to stumble into it accidentally. The sovereign ascendant pulsed contentedly around them, its bioluminescent walls cycling through colors that suggested satisfaction. And in the morning, Oliver would face his delegation's confusion and Director Hassan's inevitable aneurysm. But for now, he was exactly where he wanted to be, with someone who saw him, chose him, and made him believe that maybe he'd never been expendable at all. Just adequate enough to be extraordinary. The end. We've reached the end of another science fiction story. If this story touched you, if Oliver and Emma's unexpected connection made you think about your own choices between fear and courage, then I invite you to join the Sci-Fi Pulse community. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories that question what it means to be human, or alien, or somewhere nice in between. Tell me in the comments below, would you accept Emma's offer, or would you retreat to the safety of diplomatic protocol? The universe is full of stories waiting to be told, characters facing impossible choices in impossible circumstances. In the next sci-fi